hosting, hospitality. Does anyone else get slightly nervous when they hear those words? For myself, this is an area I've really wanted to grow in because I feel like being able to invite people into your home, especially people that are new to your community or new to your work environment or new to your church, is just such a beautiful way to be able to bless them and such a beautiful way to be able to illustrate love to them. And yet, it always makes me slightly nervous, especially when it's people that I've never really gotten to know before. So because of that, I decided about a week ago to post on Instagram asking anyone on there to please share with me their best hosting and hospitality tips. And I want to go through a super long list today fairly quickly and share these with you because if you are anything like me and the thought of hosting and hospitality is slightly intimidating, even though you genuinely want to get good at it and want to be able to bless people in that way, then I really hope these will be helpful to you because they have really enlightened me and been so informative. And so I'm really excited to jump into these with you. So the first one that I wanted to share is actually one that my aunt shared with me, and I thought it was such a good but simple piece of advice. She said, "Who is it that's coming over? That'll greatly determine how you host." And I thought that was actually such a good point because if a family comes over and they have little kids, I need to know that ahead of time and put that into consideration when it comes to how I'm going to have us seated, when it comes to having toys and something to keep them entertained. And so I thought that was super simple but super smart and really helpful to know when you first invite them over. The next one I received from several different people, and I have actually done because I think it's really important, but it's to ask before the guests come over if they have anything they're allergic to, so you can be sure not to have that included inside the meal that you have planned. And I was so grateful that my husband asked some people that we had over this last week this question because it turned out the husband was super allergic to peppers, so allergic, I think his throat would swell up if he had them. And so I was very glad because I was making a chef salad, so I was really glad I knew that ahead of time. So I think that's a super good, simple point to know about. This next one is one that also is really helpful, I think, to cut down just on that strain that can come up when you have guests over by planning ahead of time. And that is to have your seating planned. And this might sound kind of silly, but even the other day, my mother and father-in-law stopped by, who are complete family to me. And yet we only had 3 chairs at our dining room table. And so it just can be kind of awkward or kind of a bother. You feel kind of guilty having to run off to find another chair so you can sit your guests at your table. And so I think having in mind where you're going to be sitting before they ever get to your house is really helpful. And having those chairs already set up there, I think, is really beneficial. I even use a piano bench. It works fine. The next tip that was shared with me that I thought was just really good was to stop cleaning when your company arrives. And this sounds simple, but I know for myself, I can get caught up in the little details of, oh, I want the fridge to be wiped down and the microwave to be cleaned, and all these things that ultimately, if I'm stressed and strained by the time the guests arrive because I've worked myself into a tizzy, I'm not in the mood that I want to be in order to love and serve them well. And truthfully, they're not going to care. And so this is just a really good reminder for myself that ultimately it's not about having a perfectly clean house. It's about loving and serving the people that are coming through the front door. All right, the next thing that you can do before your guests ever arrive to greatly cut down, I think, on the awkwardness, and I had this shared with me a couple of times from different people, and I've done it myself a lot in the past, is to think of some deep questions to ask beforehand. And I have a couple kind of go-to questions that I love asking people because I love hearing the stories and I love hearing the answers. And so one of them I usually ask, especially if they're a couple, is I'll ask, how did you two meet? And usually this can bring up an entire great, hilarious story about how the couple met. Usually they'll ask us in return. It brings up the topic of marriage. We can dive into so many different questions from there. Another one that I'll ask if it's a mom that has a couple little kids is I'll ask, how did it change going from having 1 child to 2? Because it's a question I'm curious about, and it's something I think about a lot because we probably will eventually have a second child. Another one that I really like to ask moms is what has been the biggest challenge with being a mother, or what is a challenge you didn't expect? And I found these usually bring up really good conversations. And for myself, the biggest thing that honestly makes me really nervous with guests coming over is that either the meal won't turn out, or we'll be halfway through the evening sitting on the couches staring at each other, listening to the buzz of silence in our ears, feeling incredibly awkward with not a word left to say. And so I think this tip can do a lot of good, and I'm definitely going to continue to apply it in the future. Okay, the next thing that you can do before your guests arrive yet again, and these are kind of a couple tips tied together, is to not make an overly extravagant and complicated meal. At least for myself, this is an area, like I mentioned, that kind of stresses me. The fact that what if my meal doesn't turn out? And so some really simple go-tos is like a whole roasted chicken in the oven with potatoes and vegetables, and I can make gravy out of the broth in the pot with the chicken. Another one that I like to do is a chef's salad, because it's really simple and it works with people who might be allergic, and they can add their own things to the salad. These are just a couple of things that I like to do that are really simple. I can do a lot of the prep beforehand, which I find really helpful, because for myself, maybe it's just because I don't feel like a pro in the kitchen at all. I find trying to cook while people are there and I'm trying to focus on them and get them tea and make them drinks, I'm just always afraid I'll forget something or mess something up or burn something. I did that the last time some guests came over. And so doing as much preparation beforehand is really handy. The last thing that kind of has to do with food is to make sure you have enough food. I don't want my guests to leave feeling starved and have to go home and eat a second dinner. And I just think of my mom. Every Sunday, she would make a massive roast. She would throw in potatoes. She would put some vegetables in with the roast and cook the broth and make gravy. And it was just a hearty, super simple, fairly inexpensive, healthy meal that she would serve to anyone that we brought home with us from church. And she always had enough. And it was just warm and cozy and welcoming. And some of my most wonderful memories involve being around that dinner table, eating that simple meal, just loving the company and loving the people I was with. Here are a couple more tips to really help you prepare before your guests come. And I'm noticing with these tips, a lot of people, the advice they gave me really involves more your preparation before your guests ever even get there. That can make the evening and the atmosphere just so much more relaxing and welcoming and cozy. And I find that really interesting. So the next thing that I think is super important that I try to do is to have a house that smells good. And really, I think it is so much more forgiving to have a messy house but have it smell really good than a really clean house that has a really bad smell or just doesn't smell welcoming, doesn't smell warm or cozy. And so before guests come, either I will put on my diffuser, or now that we have a fire here in the fall, I'll put a pot of potpourri or else a waxy on the top of the stove in a little metal container and put that on a couple hours before they get to our house, or light a candle. And then even if my house isn't totally clean, the scent is good, and I think the scent is much more forgiving than a clean house with a bad smell. A tip that I received several times after mentioning that one of my fears is that my guests will feel just really awkward and uncomfortable, especially if there's long pauses, which honestly don't really bother me, but for the guest's sake, I usually feel really bad, especially if I don't know them. If I know them, then a lot of these tips I don't even do because it's like family. But a tip that kept coming up was to have background music playing. And I thought that was really interesting, but I'm definitely going to try it because I do really enjoy, when you go to someone's house around Christmas and they have holiday music playing in the background, or I enjoy classical. And so I'm definitely going to try this and see if it helps with those little awkward silences, making them just a little less awkward. Another tip for if the conversations start to kind of die, or, maybe just the energy is kind of slowing down in the room, is to have a couple of backup games that you know where they are. They're in an easy spot to get. You know how to explain them easily, or maybe they're a really common game. And I think that's a really good tip. And honestly, I really enjoy playing games, so I think it's a great idea. Okay, my fellow homemakers, because this video has gotten so long so quickly, I'm actually going to make a part 2, and so stay tuned for that. That'll either come out this coming week or the next week, and it'll be going into depth about actually entertaining your visitors once they arrive. And so stay tuned for that. And also, if there's any tips you know of that were not mentioned in this video that have to do with the preparation of hosting and hospitality, please comment them down below. I would love to learn more about this art because I really do think it's an art, and I think it's actually fairly hard. So thank you so much for watching. Have a fabulous week, and I'll see you next Saturday, hopefully, in my next video. Bye!